Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to JK'z Rewatchable Hour presents The Walking Dead Files. It's been a while since I dropped an episode. If you watch our regular show, you know my mother-in-law passed away about a month ago, and I just didn't feel like doing an episode. Well, I'm going to start doing more regular shows now. Today's episode, I want to talk about pretty much one episode in the series. It's TC-19, which is the episode where we're at the CDC. That episode begins with a flashback of Shane trying to save Rick from the hospital. You see soldiers shooting civilians, not only walkers, but they're also shooting people. Shane gets into the room and doesn't know what to do because of all the machines Rick is hooked up to. The power goes out and he checks for vitals and doesn't see any. He doesn't see Rick, although he listens to the heart. I don't know how good he thinks he is to where he can just listen, put his ear to his chest and listen, but that's what he does. So when he's leaving, he blockades the door. Why does he blockade the door? I don't know. I don't know if he doesn't want him to get... I don't know if he's not sure if he's dead or if he doesn't want him to get eaten by walkers. Because at this point, nobody knows that that you don't have to be bit to turn. So they arrive. So then they go back to the regular scene and they arrive at the CDC. The next scene, the door is open at the CDC and they walk in. And Dr. Jenner, after showing himself, he asks what they want. Rick says a chance. Jenner says, well, okay. He goes, that's a tall order right now. Hard to come by. And basically he says, if you donate a sample of blood, that would be your price of admission. Basically you give me a blood sample and you're in. So he says, he does tell them, he makes this clear. He says, he doesn't tell them why, but he makes it clear that if anything they need to bring in now, they need to do it because when the door closes, it remains closed. It won't reopen. And they ask, so where's everybody else? You know, once they go down in an elevator down below the surface, and that's where the main headquarters of the CDC apparently is. They ask him, so where's everybody else? And he says, I'm it. I'm all that's left. And when he takes Andrea's blood sample, she's really weak. And he goes, you okay? And JK'z says, she hasn't eaten in days. None of us have. And he goes, so the next scene, you see him eating. He gives him food, and they even have alcohol. Carl even tries it, but he hates it. And Shane asks, what happened here? Why are you the only one left? What happened to everyone else? He basically says that most left when it started to get bad. They left to be with their families. And they say all just left. And he goes, well, not all. Some opted out. They had a major rash of suicide among the people that worked at the CDC, that looked outside, couldn't deal with the outside. So Andrea asks him, why did you stay? When everybody else left, why did you stay? And he said he just stayed working, hoping to do some good. Tells them that, and it basically leaves it at that for now. So they're walking around after dinner, and he's showing them where they can sleep and whatnot. He goes, most of the other facility has been shut down to save power. He said, but you can There's couches that are comfortable. We have cots if you want them. They're in storage. We can pull them out. And he offers them, and then he lets them know about a rec room the kids would use, but not to plug in the video games because they'll use too much power. And he tells them if they shower, take it easy on the hot water. And they're all excited about the showering. And because a lot of them haven't done that in a while. I imagine they kind of bathed in at the quarry in the water. That's probably what they used to bathe with, and it was so. After showering, Andrea gets sick, and I think she's just getting sick from either possibly even the food or just what she's been through with Amy in the last couple days. Dale helps, and Dale tries to help her, and Andrea says everything's gone. You got to see it. Everything we know is gone. And Dale says he sees a chance for a new start. That you got to look on the bright side of things. You can't just look at what all we've lost. So right before going to bed, Rick, who's had a little too much to drink, goes to Jenner, and he basically tells him, "You helped us. We would have died out there. All of us would have eventually died." And that was just Rick's take. Rick trying to thank him, but just saying that he didn't think they would be able to make it on their own out there. And then, and Lori ends up going, and she finds Carol, Sophia, and Carl in the rec room, and they're, Carl and Sophia are playing checkers, and Carol's reading a book, and they basically decide it's bedtime, and Lori tells Carl, say your prayers and whatnot. I'll be in a bit. I'm just going to browse around. So then Shane comes into the rec room. He wants to talk to Lori. And he says, "You're going to listen. I got some things to say." She tries to walk away, but he says, don't treat me that way, and she goes, and she basically tells him, "Look, you literally told me my husband was dead. I mean, what was I supposed to do?" Shane tells her what happened at the hospital when he went there, that he put his head to his chest, couldn't hear a heartbeat. He doesn't know if it was the sound of bullets or, the shooting or why he couldn't tell if Rick was alive or dead, but he didn't hear anything. And says it was just him there, that there was no doctors, that he didn't hear the heartbeat. There was no doctors around. The soldiers were shooting everyone, and he would trade. But then he says, "I'll trade places with Rick because he loves Lori." That Shane loves Lori and tries forcing himself on her, and she scratches him. After that, he ends up, he leaves the room. He's, I don't know if he's done completely with her, but he leaves. As Rick lays down next to Lori, he sees that she's crying, and he says, "We don't have to be afraid anymore. We're safe here." Thinking that they're going to be able to stay here for forever. The next morning at breakfast, you can definitely tell that Rick, Glenn, and Shane have hangovers. Glenn probably the worst. T-Dog notices that Shane has scratches on his neck. And he said, well, what happened to you? And he goes, oh, I must have done it in my sleep. And Rick notably says, well, you've never done that before. And he goes, yeah, it's not myself lately, I guess. And he looks at Lori. So they start asking Jenner questions. They confront him. They ask him, and so he takes them down to the lab, to the main control room, and they talk about TS-19, which is test subject 19. And basically they say, so what does that mean? And they said, well, and he basically tells them it's someone who got bit and got infected, and they volunteered for us to record the process. They basically show a brain scan to show what the brain activity is as the person is still alive. And you see many synapses throughout the brain. Then he fast forwards to where the test subject dies and the brain shuts down. And he says that's death. That's when the test subject died. Then he fast forwards and he lets them know that they've recorded that the brain, that the infection invades the brain kind of like meningitis. And reanimation, they've noted, takes between 3 minutes and 8 hours. And when it happens, the brain stem is the only thing that comes back to life. He shows that, and he goes, so they're alive. And he goes, well, no, they can, their motor skills are there, but whatever makes you is still dead. He's not sure exactly. Oh, and then in the video, you see something go through the screen, and they basically realize he shot the patient. And he's not exactly sure what the virus is, or if Saint. And he says there might be some facilities still operating, not sure though. And then Dale asked a tough question. Hang on. Sorry about that. We got contractors across the street doing work on the ground, so he got a little excited. So Dale asks the all-important question. There's been this clock on the wall, a digital clock, and he goes, what's that clock and why is it ticking down to zero? What happens when it hits zero? Jenner basically tells them the generators in the basement run out of fuel and we lose power. But he didn't say, and Rick asks when the compute what happens. He asks the computer what happens when the clock hits zero, and the computer says the generator runs out of fuel at zero. It says a system-wide decontamination occurs. They don't know what that means. They go and they check the fuel and they find out it's almost gone. They're literally down to the last bit. Power in certain areas starts to die out. Basically shut off. Some of the lighting goes out. Some of the air filtration system slows down. And they ask, and as they're walking in, he explains to them that the system is shutting certain parts down. And they said, why can't you turn it back on? He goes, I don't choose. The computer chooses what power is needed to keep the computers running as long as possible. So when they're sitting there and they're talking, he ends up locking the doors to the room that they're all in. And he said that the French were the last run-in that he knew. That the French were the last ones that he knew were running. That they thought they were close to an answer of some sort, but they weren't sure exactly. And then he lost communication. Daryl goes after Jenner. Jenner says even if he opens the door, he can't open the topside doors. He reminds them that he told them once when they first came in that when the doors close, they don't reopen. He doesn't really explain why at this point. So they try to, between Daryl, T-Dog, and Shane, they try to bust out of the door. And he says that, and Jenner says that door can withstand a rocket launcher blast. And kind of a comic relief type thing, Daryl comes at him with the axe that he had and says, yes, but your head ain't. He was going to hit him. They stop him. Jenner says this is for the best. Rick said Rick tries to convince him that there's always hope. So far as the Shane threatens him with the shotgun and ends up shooting a bunch of the computers instead. Finally, they convince Jenner to open the doors to that room. He says, I can open these doors, but I can't do anything about the up top doors. They're closed. I can't open them. As they're grabbing their stuff and leaving, Jenner grabs Rick and whispers something to him. We don't find out until much later what he tells him. JK'z decides to stay. T-Dog tries to talk her out, but she goes, no, after what I saw happen with Amy and Bill, she goes, I'm done. This is what I want. So he ends up leaving. Andrea says that she decides to stay, and Dale tries to convince her to go, and he goes, okay, you win. And she goes, what do you mean I win? He goes, I'm staying. You're staying. I'm staying. So then you flash back to the other, you flash up to the other group, and they're trying to break through the window to get out of the CDC. As they're trying, they're scratching the window, but nothing less. Shane even shoots it, and nothing. And then Carol says, hey, Rick, I found this in your pants when you first came to the quarry, and I washed your clothes for you. And she hands him a grenade that he had taken from inside the tank when he was in the tank. He goes up by the window, and he tells everybody to get clear, and he pulls the pin and then drops the grenade, and then he runs. It blows, and the window does break. And they get out. And they get back. They have to shoot a few walkers on the way. They get to their vehicles, and they're looking at the time, because Rick has his watch, and he knows about how long they got. And they're getting ready to leave at first. They're getting ready to leave, and then they see Dale and Andrea just making it out. They don't make it to the vehicles. They have to dive into one of the sandbag bunkers that the soldiers had made. And then the place blows up. And then basically after that, they all get in and they leave. Well, my take from the show is that maybe Jenner didn't know what caused it, and he knew that the CDC was in shutdown. But why wouldn't he want to take a chance and take what he needed from the CDC to maybe continue his work elsewhere, and probably go with this group. I'm sure if he'd wanted to leave, I don't know. Maybe he couldn't have overridden the system, but that's my take. My take was he had lost his wife, who was TS-19, and he just wanted to end it as well. He wanted, like what JK'z wanted. JK'z just wanted it to be over. Andrea wanted it to be over, but she didn't want Dale's death caused by her, which is ultimately what it would have been. It's an interesting episode. We find out much later what he whispered to Rick. But my other take on it is he told them that the doors wouldn't close when they first came in, but he didn't tell them that meant forever, that he could never open those doors again. He just said they don't open again. You know, he wasn't specific, and he didn't tell them the end. I don't know if they had much of a choice, because at that point, there was a lot of walkers coming around. But yeah, that's where I understand why the CDC would want to self-destruct and burn up everything that they had been working on, because if those diseases got out that they find cures for, or they find, you know, a treatment for it, gets out, it'll infect everybody else in another way. Yeah, that's just what I take from it. I don't know if Jenner could have done any good after, but at least he probably had some medical background. He could have helped out in some way, but I just think the death of his wife was too much for him, and he decided he wanted out. So I'm going to be dropping a couple more episodes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the spin-off shows in a few episodes. I'm looking to maybe at least start my Fear the Fear the Walking Dead. Talking about at least the first couple seasons. But for now, this has been JK'z Rewatchable Hour presents The Walking Dead Files. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I'll see you next time.